All right, good morning, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute. We're letting some people in right now. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our virtual talk. As we get started here, there's just a couple of housekeeping things. We ask that you please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and our speaker will be happy to address any questions or comments at the end of the program. If you're joining us over Facebook Live, welcome to you guys as well. Our Facebook audience can also ask questions using the comment section on Facebook. We will be monitoring those comments and answering them at the end of the program as well. Please note that this talk is being recorded and streamed live and will be posted to our social media once it's over. And if you would like to rewatch this talk or previous virtual tours and talks, please check out our Facebook page. And I'm excited to introduce our speaker today, Miss Eleanor, who's a docent with the Timken, and she's going to give an amazing lecture today. And with that, I will hand it over to Eleanor.
Thank you, Tiffany. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, based on where you are. One apology to begin. If you're seeing some gray area around the screen, we apologize for that. Hopefully it's not too distracting. One of the technical difficulties we couldn't overcome, but I hope you're seeing the main screen clearly. So greetings again and welcome to today's virtual tour with the Timken. My name is Eleanor Merle, as Tiffany said, and I'm delighted to be with you for today's presentation entitled Painted Love. Now, it's no surprise that throughout history, love has been one of the most frequently and most beautifully depicted subjects. After all, what could be more romantic than the act of trying to capture on canvas a feeling that is at once so elusive and so universal? Tender embraces, passionate outbursts, stolen kisses. Artists have been representing the dramatic, mind-altering effects of love for centuries. So join me today, just in time for Valentine's Day, in celebrating love in all its painted forms. And where better to start than in a tomb from ancient Egypt? Here we have two men described in the hieroglyphics as royal confidants. Their bond seems intimate, yet the actual nature of their relationship remains a mystery. The presence of their wives and offspring in certain panels among the glyphs has led many Egyptologists to conclude that they were siblings, and repeated depictions of the two men embracing have convinced many that their intimate relationship might have been accepted by their respective wives. One thing is certain: two men of equal social standing being buried together in the same tomb, in spite of the fact that they were undoubtedly married to women, was unique. The mystery may remain forever locked in the mixed messages of the tomb's hieroglyphics, but the words the men chose to have inscribed over the entrance are unambiguously clear. Quote, "Joined in life and joined in death." Now, also unambiguous were the rules that governed a knight in the Middle Ages seeking the hand of a lovely maiden. These rules were laid out in an early medieval literary work, The Art of Courtly Love by Andreas Capellianus, written in the late 12th century. So let's take a peek at just what some of those rules were. First, ladies, do not befriend men with dismembered arms. They are without chivalry and probably have wandering hands as well. Ladies, do ensure that you go to bed with the right man. Beware of shape-shifting wizards in particular. Now we turn to gentlemen. Do seek out opportunities to defend your lady's honor, preferably with a violent display of martial skill. Extra marks if you present the head of your vanquished opponent as proof of your love. And finally, gentlemen, don't wear a suggestively shaped sword. It's unlikely to convince a lady of your honorable intentions. So we see that all was not so dark in the Middle Ages, and love endured. And someone who knows all about love is Venus, the goddess of love. She's been an inspiration for artists throughout history, and no more so than in Sandro Botticelli's iconic work, The Birth of Venus, whose title is actually misleading. The painting shows not the watery birth of Venus, but her arrival in a colossal shell on the shores of Cyprus, the position of her hands conveying her modesty. She's flanked on the left by the wind god Zephyr, who blows her to a safe harbor. He's assisted by what is thought to be Aura, a wind-made deity. On the shore to the right, Venus is greeted by the Hora of spring, a personification of the season, who prepares to wrap the goddess in a floral cloak, roses twirling around the wind being her symbol. This is the earliest surviving large-scale nude Venus of the Renaissance, the subject of a full-length nude female being highly unusual, especially in the 15th century. We do see nudes in medieval art and even in the Renaissance art before this, but the nudes are usually Adam and Eve. Beginning in the 15th century, artists began to introduce heroic nudity within a biblical context. Consider, for example, Donatello's David. But in Botticelli, we have something exceptional, an almost lifelike female nude that is fully pagan in its subject matter, pagan and undoubtedly the goddess of love. It's highly probable that the work was commissioned by a member of the Medici family. This hypothesis would seem to be borne out by the orange trees in the painting, which are considered an emblem of the Medici dynasty on account of the assonance between the family name and the name of the orange tree, which at the time was Mala Medica. And it's also very likely that the muse who inspired many of Botticelli's women, including this Venus, was a well-known young blonde woman living in Florence at the time. Her name was Simonetta, and she was the wife of Marco Vespucci, cousin of the famous Amerigo Vespucci, whose name was given to the new continent of America. Simonetta was a legendary beauty, and the Medici were besotted with her, especially Giuliano, who was Lorenzo the Magnificent's brother. He openly flaunted his admiration for her, despite her being married. She died very young, at the age of 23, and is buried in Ognissanti Church in Florence. Botticelli asked to be buried at her feet, and the Vespucci family agreed. You can still see their tombs in this church today. Seemingly, Botticelli was unconcerned with the budding Renaissance interest in realism and perspective. The figures you'll see are weightless. They don't stand firmly on the ground the way we often expect Renaissance figures to stand. And the figure of Venus forms this serpentine shape that actually would almost be an impossible way to stand, certainly when you're surfing to shore on a seashell. Note also that the figures don't cast shadows. What we're looking at is still an incredibly beautiful and erotic image, one which continues to inspire social media aficionados to this day, as we see here. Now, just as Venus, who was the Roman goddess of love, or Aphrodite, the Greek in Greek mythology, even though they feature prominently in painting in Renaissance Europe, so does her son Cupid, the god of desire. In Lorenzo Lotto's work, we see him armed with his bow and arrows. Lorenzo Lotto painted this marriage portrait of a couple from Bergamo, Marsilio Casati and Faustina Assanica, in 1523. The portrait uses Renaissance hero symbolism to express the goals and ideals of marriage in the 16th century. Bride and groom are wearing elegant and costly clothing to indicate their wealthy status. The bride wears several expensive pieces of jewelry, including a gold chain draped over her shoulders, composed of many links, and this was known as a bond of love. The concept of a happy union is conveyed in metaphorical terms by a smiling Cupid, who of course is identified by the supply of arrows he carries in a basket strapped to his chest. He holds a yoke behind the couple and places a sprig of laurel, a symbol of virtue, on the shoulder of each. Yet another symbol associated with love is honeysuckle, as depicted a little over 100 years later, when Peter Paul Rubens painted himself and his wife in a luscious setting, a honeysuckle bower. You can almost smell the sweet fragrance of honeysuckle emanating from the garden alcove in this full-length portrait of Rubens and his new wife, Isabella Brandt. Few paintings convey the promise of wedded bliss and marital fidelity as this double portrait, likely painted as a gift for Isabella's father. Honeysuckle is a climbing shrub which here surrounds, embraces, and protects the newlyweds. Since ancient times, it's been the traditional symbol of good feeling, devotion, loyalty, happiness, and everlasting love. As its sweet-smelling flowers draw in bees, birds, butterflies, and as dusk falls, moths, so lovers are drawn to amorous feelings through the plant's entwining embrace. Although Rubens does sit higher than his wife on a stool, the painting nevertheless suggests, if not a marriage of equals, then a loving partnership, and we see this in the depiction of their joined hands. At the close of a marriage ceremony, the right hands of the spouses were brought together by the matron of honor, representing the goddess Juno, indicating that the spouses had entered into a marriage under Roman law. The right hand was sacred to Fides, the deity of fidelity. The joining or clasping of the right hands by two people signified harmony, friendship, and loyalty, as well as fidelity between the couple after death, when the deceased would be reunited with their spouse. Sadly, Isabella would die around 15 years later at the age of 34, probably of bubonic plague, which left Rubens devastated. This posthumous portrait to commemorate Isabella reveals his abiding attitude toward his wife, whom, in his epitaph, he'd called his excellent companion. She's shown with her right hand holding a small book in the same position as Rubens' right hand in the honeysuckle bower, This time, however, Rubens isn't there to support it. Instead, she cradles her own right breast with her left hand. In the background is a column overgrown in vine, which possesses the same emblematic significance of the dead tree as in the Latin motto translated, "Friendship lasting even beyond death." The portrait is thus a painting of both loss and the promise of eternal life and love. Now, Rembrandt also did a double portrait about 40 years later, but unlike Rubens' couple, the identities of the sitters generated quite a bit of controversy. The work gained its name in the early 19th century when an Amsterdam art collector identified the couple as that of a Jewish father bestowing a necklace upon the daughter on her wedding day. This is no longer, however, the favorite interpretation. Rather, most commonly accepted is the identification of the figure as the biblical couple, Isaac and Rebekah. This is as described in the book of Genesis. And this view is supported by an earlier Rembrandt drawing of the couple with the same theme, which shows them in a similar composition. The drawing reveals the characteristic and instantly recognizable gesture of the man reaching out to place a caressing hand on the breast of the woman. Here we see in the center of this horizontally oriented canvas, a woman in a luxurious red dress, standing with her wrists and neck draped in pearls. Her companion stands to her right, one arm reaching behind her, the other reaching out to lay a hand at her breast. He's equally richly dressed in a vertically pleated garment over a shirt in shades of gold and brown. The fingers of her left hand gently rest on his in a touching, protective gesture. The two figures, despite the intimacy of their gesture, don't look at each other, nor do they look at the viewer. They're alone in this moment, set beside an arch and a potted plant barely indicated in the shades of dark, mottled brown. The lack of scenery and the intimate focus on the two figures supports the idea that this was intended as a particular type of portrait, known as a portrait historié or historiated portrait, where two real people dressed up for their portrait. Having one's portrait painted in the guise of an historical or biblical figure may seem strange to us today, but the portrait historié was surprisingly common in the 17th century. Whether the patrons were dressing up as biblical figures and thereby hoping to lay claim to their virtues, or as mythological figures demonstrating erudition or theatrical ties, historiated portraits existed comfortably alongside the more typical portraits of stern-faced people wearing black. Now, I think we're ready to lighten up a bit and take a look at one of the most powerful evocations of love in the history of art, painted by Jean-Honoré Fragonard, who, along with François Boucher, was one of the most renowned artists of the Rococo style in France. His works tell the story of love in an effortless and beautiful way, no more so than in his 4-panel work entitled The Progress of Love, which depicts the 4 ages of love. But first, a bit of background. This work is linked with the career of Jeanne Bécu, Countess de Barry, the last mistress of the aging Louis XV. De Barry came from a humble background, and as a young woman was a housekeeper, a hairdresser, a shopkeeper, and a sex worker. Louis XV fell in love with her in 1768, gave her a title, and elevated her to the position of official royal mistress. The king, who died in 1774, spent the last 5 years of his life with Du Barry. Adored and despised by her contemporaries, Madame de Barry became an important patron of the arts in the twilight of the Ancien regime. Among her remarkable enterprises was the renovation of the chateau at Louvain-Sienne, just west of Paris, for which she commissioned a music pavilion designed by the prominent architect Claude Nicolas Ledoux. He finished in a year, and the best artists, sculptors, craftsmen were employed to decorate this pleasure pavilion, including Jean-Honoré Fragonard, who was given one room. These were to be the most important paintings at Louvain-Sienne, and the artist, the patron, and the architect chose the story of the progress of love, 4 canvases depicting the 4 stages of love. So just picture yourself, as you entered the palace, you would have seen 2 paintings on either side of a window looking out into a garden. On the left, you would see the first picture, The Pursuit, a flirtatious proposal in which a young man springs out to offer a flower to his would-be mistress. She's running away, but not too fast, and surrounded by chaperones. We see in the background a statue of a dolphin and 2 putti who are pulling the dolphin back. Sculptures are key to understanding the story in Fragonard's pictures. Dolphins were Jupiter's agents in love affairs. They were the beasts that he sent to capture the beautiful maidens. In this painting, they're symbols of arrested or expectant desire. Desire is in the air, but love is not happening quite yet. On the right-hand side of the window, you would see the second panel, The Meeting. This is a furtive meeting in which the lover scales the wall of a garden. The girl is definitely aware he's coming and is looking forward to seeing him. The sculpture here shows Venus, the goddess of love, holding a quiver of arrows away from the young Cupid, the god of love. Love is not quite ready to take place. The god of love is impatient, and the goddess of love is holding back. We're not, as it were, quite there yet. So now I'd like you to turn around in the room, looking with the garden behind you, and you would come to number 3 in the series, to the left-hand side of the door you had entered. And here would be the lover crowned, depicting consummation or marriage, where the girl crowns her lover. Here, everything is in bloom. The garden is at its most verdant floral. We can almost smell the scents of the peonies, the roses, the orange tree, and the myrtle tree. The lovers, who are being recorded for posterity by the young artist, are actually wearing theatrical costume, which audiences would recognize as stage performing costume. In the statuary, Cupid has fallen asleep, his little quiver is empty as his work is done. In this panel, love is finally given full expression. The 4th and last picture in the series, on the other side of the entryway, is love letters. In love letters, a man and a woman are shown reading letters while tenderly embracing, suggesting reminiscence of early courtship from a position of greater security. At their feet is a spaniel, as we know, signifying fidelity, and they're watched over by a statue personifying friendship, who refuses to surrender the heart she holds at her chest. She refuses to surrender it to the Cupid that reaches for it. In addition to the sculpture through which Fragonard uses the different emblems and motifs to lead us through the story, he's also a master of landscape. We see in the early painting of the pursuit the growing excitement. Suddenly, trees and flowers are burgeoning in the meeting, but everything is in full bloom once we get to the lover crowned. Finally, when we get to love letters, the narrative reaches resolution as reflected in the sky and trees. The dark clouds and rustling branches of earlier panels have given way to the restful glow of a calm twilight, and there's a sense of contentment. As beautiful and successful as this series of paintings were, hard as it may be to believe, once they were hanging, Madame du Barry wasn't happy with them. And this was likely due to the contrast with the architectural setting for which it was intended. She actually sent them back to Fragonard, and she didn't pay him for the year's work. Quite a public rejection of Fragonard's most ambitious paintings. It was a hard blow for the artist who actually left Paris for a year, traveling throughout Italy, perhaps to lick his wounds. It was the last major decorative series Fragonard would undertake. He kept the 4 paintings likely rolled up for the next 20 years until an appropriate venue was found. The Rococo style of art was short-lived as discontent in France was growing, with a turn to more serious art. The neoclassical style, with its greatest proponent, Jacques-Louis David. David used the story of Cupid and Psyche, which would have been very well known in 1817, to explore the conflict between idealized love and physical reality. Cupid, lover of the beautiful mortal Psyche, visited her nightly on the condition that she didn't know his identity. Cupid was usually depicted as an ideal adolescent, but here, David presents him as an ungainly teenager, smirking at his sexual context. David took inspiration from a number of ancient texts, including an obscure, recently published Greek poem by Moshe that describes Cupid as a mean-spirited brat with dark skin, flashing eyes, and curly hair. The work drew mixed reviews. Some people were thrilled by the novelty of it, and they understood that David was doing a subject that they'd seen many times before in a way that had never been seen before, in a way that gave life to the classical tradition. Other people thought it was crass and vulgar and wrong to present these gods that were supposed to be so beautiful in a way that didn't seem to take into account the nobility appropriate for that tradition. David would likely have been very amused by all this. And here's a fun fact. Psyche in Greek means both soul, S-O-U-L, and butterfly. And it's likely why David depicts 2 butterflies in this work. On the left, you see one of the butterflies decorated on the bottom of the bed in the middle, and it's a very neoclassical butterfly. And then on the right, you have this insect that's flying above their heads, and perhaps it's meant to be a bit of a joke. You have this goddess associated with the butterfly, but David is showing you that it's a real living insect, apparently a cabbage butterfly. So not a multicolored, beautiful insect, but something much more common, ordinary, and real. Now, one cannot speak of painted love without discussing perhaps the most iconic and recognizable image of love in the artistic realm. And of course, I'm referring to the work by Gustav Klimt entitled The Kiss. I am sure everyone has seen this. The kiss constitutes the height of Gustav Klimt's golden phase, which lasted from about 1901 to 1909, not a very long period. His keen interest in gold was ignited first by his father's occupation as a goldsmith, and then by the mosaics of San Vitale, which he'd seen in 2 visits to Ravenna, Italy in 1903. For Klimt, the flatness of the mosaics and their lack of perspective and depth enhanced their golden brilliance. And here he used a powdered gold coating, creating a shimmering background that acts as a golden cocoon for the lovers. The work is a menage of different schools of art. As noted, the gold leaf harkens back to such Byzantine mosaic artworks he'd seen in Ravenna. The composition also reflects the influence of Japanese woodblock prints, of which Klimt was an avid collector, and which was also evident in some earlier Impressionist paintings. The flat, intricate patterns of the meadow and the contrasting patterns of the 2 lovers' cloaks reflects the arts and crafts movement of the era. And overall, Klimt imbued the kiss with elements of his signature Art Nouveau style patterns, creating a very sensual, atmospheric composition. So what we see is an embracing couple concealed behind a large golden cloak. The heavy embellishment protects and encircles the couple, reiterating the immortality of their love. 2 distinctive parts constitute the image. The first part, depicting the man, shows a repeating geometric black and white motif, symbolizing his strength, virility, and masculinity. Meanwhile, the second part portrays that of the woman, where Klimt uses flowers and circles to reflect images of femininity and maternity. It's been suggested that the embrace is a double portrait, where the lovers are symbolic of the artist and his long-term partner, Emily Floge. However, the female figure could also be another of Klimt's many muses or romantic conquests. As Klimt painted relentlessly, he also loved women relentlessly and had many lovers over his lifetime. We'll end our tour with a couple known for their tumultuous but enduring love, a rather unusual double portrait by Frida Kahlo, depicting her and her husband, the painter Diego Rivera. Kahlo began this work in the late summer of 1940, after the artist had divorced. And as so often in her works, Kahlo makes metaphor literal. The painting expresses Frida's desire to possess Diego Rivera, who continues betraying her with his affairs with other women, but she cannot stop thinking about him. Hence, she painted a miniature portrait of him on her brow, indicating the obsessive love she has for the famous Mexican artist. Kahlo wears the traditional Tijuana costume Diego loved and a crown of leaves that seems to spread like a web, as if Kahlo was trapped like a spider in both the picture and the obsession. But that wasn't the end of their story. By the time the picture was finished in 1943, I'm pleased to say they had remarried. This brings our tour to a close. I hope you've enjoyed viewing the works of L'Amour dating back to antiquity. I think it's safe to say that as long as love is in the air, artists will depict it in their works. Thank you, and I welcome any comments or questions.
All right. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. And then do we have any questions or comments? Feel free to unmute yourself if you do, or put them in the chat. So it looks like we have a question from Ryan asking if you've been to see the Fragonard 4-painting series in person.
Sadly, I have not. I immersed myself in it, though, as it was the probably the major, part of the presentation, along with the Klimt work. So I feel as though I've seen it, and certainly it's on my bucket list.
And then we have a follow-up saying great part of the presentation and thanks as well. All right, and if there's no more questions, oh, and then we have a comment from Sabine saying that she saw The Kiss in Vienna once before.
Yes, I actually also saw The Kiss in person, and I mean, Klimt's work is amazing. There's a museum in New York, the new NEU Gallery, which is dedicated to German expressionism. And if you're ever in New York and you enjoy works of this period, it's a must-go place.
And then a follow-up from Ryan asking if any of the works shown today are at the Timken.
No, sadly, none of these are, although we have a wonderful large, it's the largest painting by Boucher, and a smaller work by Fragonard. So those are, really wonderful paintings to visit in the museum. And we do have a work, a neoclassical portrait by David. So we certainly have representation of a few of these artists. Yeah, I see a note about thanking for the stimulating presentation and sharing the presentation with my friends via Facebook chat. I know Tiffany will mention that, and thank you so much. I'm so pleased you enjoyed it, and that you'll share it with others.
All right. And then if there are no more comments or questions, we will wrap up. Thank you for that comment about sharing with Facebook. Like I said earlier, this lecture will be shared after the presentation. And if anybody would like to know more about our upcoming events, please check out our events page on our website. Also, I will announce we have another talk on Thursday, January 26th at 11 again. And the subject will be manuscript illuminations. So we do look forward to that. And thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope you can join us for our next virtual talk. Thank you again to Eleanor, and have a great afternoon, everybody. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.